Okay, well, welcome everyone. We are here tonight. First of all, thank you for joining our town hall. We're here tonight to present on the Tahoe Basin Area Plan economic sustainability and housing related amendments. Here tonight, you just heard Supervisor Gustafson is on the call tonight and has a few words to say in a minute here. We also have Stephanie Holloway with our county executive office in Tahoe. And then we have two Tahoe staff that have been leading this effort that are going to present tonight. We have Emily Setzer out of our Community Development Resource Agency on the call here tonight, and as well as Stacy Wydra. Both work out of the Tahoe City office, and so do I. I am the Assistant Director of the Community Development Resource Agency and am housed in Tahoe as well. So before kind of handing it off, I am going to just talk real quick about the purpose, Cindy, and then I'll turn it over to you. So this is a county initiated amendment package that includes revisions that are aimed at promoting and encouraging economic sustainability in the production of housing. This work program initiated in 2021. We have prepared these amendments working side by side with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, otherwise known as TRPA. We've done that to ensure that they are consistent with TRPA's regional plan and their very strict growth control measures that they have in the basin. And so they are really, the purpose of the amendments is that they are in response to the lack of redevelopment and reinvestment that we've seen in our town centers. Our area plan that we're proposing to amend here was first adopted in 2017, and it was intended to implement the regional plan with a vision of really shifting development into our town centers, actually shifting, I would say, redevelopment, because our town centers are really built out already, but are in need of redevelopment. So the idea was that these amendments would help to spur reinvestment. The area plan and the amendments would help to spur reinvestment. So in Placer, we have two town centers. We've got Kings Beach and Tahoe City. And we have seen significant public investment into those towns in the way of sidewalk infrastructure, water quality improvements, streetscape improvements. A lot of public dollars have gone into reinvesting in our town centers with the goal of implementing the TRPA regional plan and bringing environmental benefits. And then with the adoption of the 2017 area plan, the goal really was to kind of build on those investments and set up a regulatory and framework that really encouraged that same kind of reinvestment from private property owners in the town center. So those local businesses and property owners prepare a regulatory framework that would allow them to come in or encourage them to come in and redevelop. But fast forward to today, we have not seen a whole lot of that. So really that vision and that goal has not come to reality. And so we've kind of asked ourselves why. And the county prepared a study in 2019 to kind of look at that and sort of explore and adaptively manage the program and really understand the why behind the lack of reinvestment that we've seen on the private side. And so this, what came out of that study is a set of recommendations to the county of actions that they could take. And one of them was to look at the area plan and look for some adjustments that could be made to the plan that would further encourage that private reinvestment. So that's really the reason we are here today. We are responding to that study that was done. And we're hoping to sort of move the needle on seeing that reinvestment. I do want to point out that we are still we have to abide by the TRPA growth control measures. They're very strict control measures related to the limiting residential units, tourist accommodation units, and commercial floor areas. So we're not proposing to modify any of that. We are not proposing any density increases in terms of like changing the density standards that are in the area plan. So those remain stable. And again, we have to be in conformance with the TRPA regional plan. So that's really the reason we're here today. We, again, are bound by that TRPA carrying capacity. We are simply looking at some areas where we can make some refinements or modifications to help spur that kind of reinvestment on private property. and housing construction, knowing that we've got a housing crisis in the basin. So I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to you, Cindy, for opening remarks.
Sorry. Thanks, Crystal, and thanks everyone for joining tonight, because I see we have a really good turnout, 41 folks already. And so I'm really pleased to see that. We heard loud and clear from the community staff, the 4 people you see up here, Emily, Stacy, Stephanie, and Crystal. We've all been in the community and hearing your concern about height and massing of these buildings. And so those have been eliminated from this set of amendments going forward. Staff's going to walk you through all of the amendments that are left. We think for the most part, they're non-controversial, but I did have a couple of constituents I talked to in the last day or two who still remain concerned. And so I want to make sure that this is an open and transparent process for them to ask, for you all to ask staff those questions and ahead of the Planning Commission meeting. Staff has not only done a tremendous amount of work in hearing you and hearing the concerns, but also going ahead and adding this town hall meeting to make sure that there's plenty of opportunity before the Planning Commission. And then I think staff will review with you after Planning Commission. If it were approved and not delayed, it would go to the Board of Supervisors, the APC at TRPA, and finally to the governing board at TRPA. So we're still talking about another 5 or 6 public meetings, Crystal, where decision makers will be hearing concerns and comments. It is a long process, but we want to be thorough and really transparent to the community. You know, not only has the county invested millions in infrastructure in our town centers to help with the sediment and the nutrients that are getting into the lake, but also for transportation and mobility issues and continuing many of our programs. I was involved many years ago in raising the money for Tahoe City sidewalks and drainage and really pushing that project forward. And it's very challenging to see how much public investment we're trying to assist to help our town centers redevelop and reinvest in the downtown communities, because so many of the buildings were built decades and decades ago. So we're looking for those tools in our financial tools. How do we further that? How do we help and incentivize reinvestment in those properties, many of which are boarded up or have been torn down and are not productive now, for our communities, for business activity, as well as the economic vitality? And as many of you have heard me say before, you know, our man-made environment doesn't reflect the magnificence of the natural environment we get to live in. And so how do we help get that reinvestment going, where we know so much of the nutrient loading in our lake is coming from our town centers? So as we look at this tonight, I want to thank staff for putting this town hall together. After our last NITRAC meeting, there was a concern that the public needed more time and more education on what was left in the amendments. And Crystal, Stacy, and Emily have worked hard to bring a presentation forward for you. Unfortunately, I have a 6 o'clock meeting and I'm going to run to that, but I know you all know my email because I get lots of emails, and happy to respond further with your concerns after you've heard this presentation. But I do want to commend staff. We have more Tahoe staff working on these area plans than we ever have in my history of living and working in Placer County and Lake Tahoe. And I want to thank staff for your investment and your listening to the public about their concerns. We will probably still be looking at what else we'll need to tweak. This is not a one and done. What we have found with the STR regulations and other programs we've put in place, we don't get it right the first time and it won't be complete. There'll be more we need to address. And so how we look at height in the future, we've heard you. You do not want everything taller, but are there sites that it may work for? we may talk about that in the future, but that will be a whole separate process that will probably take as long, if not longer, than the process that we've put to date so far. But I don't want to hide that or sugarcoat it from any of you. We have a challenge, and we think these amendments are going a long ways, but will they go far enough? We hope so. But if they don't, we need to be able to be flexible and continue to help our communities in the area. So I just wanted to lay that out for the staff and thank them again for pulling this together to do a town hall tonight. And I'll stay on for a little bit before I leave for my 6 o'clock meeting. And Crystal, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great.
Thank you. And thanks so much, everyone, for participating.
Yeah, thank you, Supervisor Gustafson. And thank you, everyone, again, who are on the call. We appreciate your participation tonight. So I'm going to touch on, I think Stacy is handling the slides. There we go. So I kind of went through the background on the proposal already. But I do really quick just to let you know, we are going to be answering questions and answers in the Q&A portion of the webinar here tonight. So we'll actively be doing that. And then at the end of the presentation, we will actually take Q&A. So you can use the raise hand button and we'll promote you to panelists so that we can take your question and answer, hopefully answer your questions there too. And so I'm going to touch on the time. So actually, before you go, Stacy, to the timeline. So for background, again, I mentioned that this was initiated in 2021. We started meeting with stakeholders and exploring potential revisions, and then started public meetings in 2022. And so this item did go before a North Tahoe Regional Advisory Council as an action item on November 30th. It had gone 2 times before that, actually. It went on October 13th in 2022 and then November 9th. And then they took action on November 30th. And their action was kind of multi-pronged. They did recommend to our Planning Commission that the height remain at 56. So you're going to see a change tonight in response to that. And then they had some other things that they wanted us to consider. One was transition zones in the town centers, and our area plan actually already has transition zones. So that has, we do have that in place. And then they wanted us to look at fire evacuation and egresses and updates to our 2016 environmental analysis. So we did go and conduct some more environmental analysis and prepared an addendum. So that is being forwarded to the, or being brought forward to the commission at their August 10th meeting. They also asked us to look at efforts to support redevelopment over new development, which is really what these amendments do. And then they had a comment about a development right manual, which is a work program that we intend to bring forward in the future. And they wanted to make sure that we would have community input as part of that work program, and we will be doing that. So, so again, they went before the North Tahoe Regional Advisory Council November 30th. And then it went before our Planning Commission. We forwarded the NITRAC recommendation to the Planning Commission then. And there was a pretty long hearing in December at the commission. But they did continue the item and asked that staff conduct additional outreach and analysis. So since then, we have done just that. We prepared the addendum. We actually hired an environmental consultant and prepared an addendum to that 2017 it was the Tahoe Basin Area Plan, Environmental Impact Report, Environmental Impact Statement. And that will be available this Thursday night. It'll be released as part of the Planning Commission staff report package. So you will see that tied to that release and the material that'll be released for the Planning Commission hearing. The Planning Commission hearing is on August 10th. We also conducted a community workshop on March 9th this year, and it was an interactive community workshop where we engaged the community on a number of items, including town center revitalization, density and development rights, housing, and then building form. So we were looking for comments on building height and building length. We did receive a lot of comments on building height. that'd be maintained at 56. So you'll see a change there. Stacy will touch on that tonight. So the amendment package scheduled for the 10th, again, it will contain the addendum. And the commission we will be asking the commission to forward a recommendation on to our Board of Supervisors. That would be adoption of a resolution and ordinance to repeal and replace the area plan with the amendments proposed, and then also consider adoption of the addendum. Next slide. So this talks about the timeline and kind of illustrates what we've done. So in 2022, we had a lot of meetings. We held a workshop before the Planning Commission, also a workshop before the TRPA Regional Advisory, the TRPA RPIC, which is the Regional Plan Implementation Committee. And then we went before the NITRIC a couple of times. We also went before Downtown Association, the Business Association, and the North Tahoe Regional or North Tahoe Community Alliance. So a lot of meetings happened in 2022. And then since then, you'll see we did the March 9th workshop, the August 1st, and then of course tonight's town hall, and then we'll be at the commission in next Thursday night, or next Thursday. It's during the day. It's at 11 o'clock. And that'll be held in Tahoe at the North Tahoe Event Center in Kings Beach. And then after that, we are targeting an October 17th board hearing, and then off to TRPA for hearings. So as you can see, there are a lot of opportunities to weigh in after this meeting here tonight. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily to start the presentation, and then I will close at the end and take questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have gotten a lot of feedback from the community over the years from a lot of different sources about what isn't working in our North Lake Tahoe region, in our town centers, for our local workers. Why aren't we getting that redevelopment that everybody expected? Why don't we have housing for our local workers? So really, these amendments were targeted at being things we could make easier to happen. So if we could facilitate commercial redevelopment, if we could make it easier to build workforce housing. This all came from lots of feedback from people who are involved in the building industry. So architects, designers, builders, developers, small business owners. We talked to a lot of small business owners too. We based a lot of this feedback directly from the input we were receiving from our business associations and chamber. A lot of this input came from Mountain Housing Council. We also worked with an economist to conduct a study on the revitalization of our town centers and what were the process barriers that were preventing us from getting the development. And then we also, towards the very end of that outreach process, we had the Tahoe Prosperity Center release their Envision Tahoe playbook, which really mirrored a lot of the same feedback that we had been getting for years. So this is from our customers, from the community, from people involved in building, really from the community as a whole. So our amendments really attempt to facilitate the redevelopment that may seem a little counterintuitive, but per TRPA and all of the jurisdictions around the lake, we really need that environmentally beneficial redevelopment, because right now we have aging, dilapidated town centers. We have a lack of quality lodging. So we don't have places for people to stay, and we don't have a ton of places for people to do, like go to the boutiques that they'd like to go to, or hit the cute little local bar. And we definitely have a selection, but we've heard that people would like even more diversity. So what's happened is we've also had more short-term rentals in the neighborhoods because we have a lack of quality and diverse lodging opportunities like hotels for people to stay at. We have a lack of housing for local workers. If you ask pretty much any local employer, including us at the county, we all are having a very hard time recruiting staff to live here and work here. We have a lot of vacant commercial spaces. I know the North Tahoe Business Association counted the number of vacant spaces, I think it was a year ago or so, and there were over 30 vacant commercial spaces just in the Kings Beach town center. And a lot of businesses have been interested in coming into North Lake Tahoe, and then they kind of do some digging and research and they go elsewhere, which is disappointing. So all of this means we have increased runoff into the lake. We have more congestion. We have more people living out of the area. And our town centers are lacking vibrancy and walkability. What we're trying to create is a diverse business sector, new lodging products in town centers, new hotels. They don't have to be huge, they can be small, but really a diversity of options for people to choose where and how they want to stay here. We're trying to get new workforce housing so our local workers can have the option of living here and have a little more freedom in making those decisions. And then really being able to support the year-round economy. Our local businesses over the years have said that sometimes it's hard to create and support a business here because it's not steady year-round. And in order for us to be able to make those things happen, we would get a lot of environmental benefits. So we would have some decreased runoff into the lake with that new development. We could shift some lodging from the neighborhoods into the town centers, really create more vibrancy, reduce congestion, let people live closer to where they work, and create that steady customer base for the businesses. So this set of amendments really does align very closely with TRPA. Crystal mentioned that we had been working closely with TRPA staff, and we have been hand in hand with them the whole time. I'm not going to read all of these, but these are from the TRPA regional plan. So these quotes are from the plan that guides land use around the entire Tahoe Basin. It says that redeveloping existing town centers is a high priority, that town centers are targeted for redevelopment in a manner that improves environmental conditions. We're here to try to preserve the character of established residential areas outside of town centers. They'd like us to ensure adequate capacity for redevelopment and to better address water quality issues. So when we get new development, we get a lot of new things like curb and gutter and less dirt and less runoff that goes straight into the lake. So it really does help the water quality. This set of amendments also really does align with a lot of the other plans and programs that both TRPA and our County Board of Supervisors have approved over recent years. That includes Placer County's Resort Triangle Transportation Plan, which really guides how we're trying to help people get around between Tahoe City, Kings Beach, and Truckee without having to rely on cars all the time, which is a big goal, and we have a lot of steps to try and get there. It also aligns with Placer County's parking initiatives that have already been adopted by our board. That included a 2-year pilot parking exemption program for town centers that really kind of focused on some flexibility for new businesses to come in and not have to create more paved parking areas, and really be able to share the existing parking that we have and contribute to things like the bus transit system. And then it also aligns with our transportation demand management strategies, which is trying to figure out how we can get people to park once when they get here and be able to walk or hop on a bus or bike to where they'd like to get, so that we don't have to have people driving in cars everywhere. The plans that we bring forward, the amendments, are to both our implementing regulations and to our policy portion of the Tahoe Basin Area Plan. The Tahoe Basin Area Plan really is our guiding land use document for our North Tahoe portion of the Tahoe Basin. It was adopted by our Board of Supervisors in 2016 and by TRPA right after that. And it's the two documents, the implementing regs, which are the zoning, the code, and that policy document, which really guides the big picture principles and goals of what the area plan would like to accomplish. So it identifies capital improvements, it identifies policy initiatives, and then different steps and programs that are put in place in order to achieve those goals. It was last amended on a pretty minor level in 2020 to reflect some updates to accessory dwelling units that were put forward by the California state. So the policy goals here, I'll go over the policy amendments. These are really the goals that are supposed to guide our region. And we have heard a lot of feedback about policies as well. So since Crystal went over that long timeline, we've done a lot of outreach. Since that planning commission hearing in December, and then we had a community workshop in March, we have done some revisions to this set of amendments. One is that we have removed the word ridgelines that was deleted from a policy. The intent behind that change was we were trying to focus really on the TRPA scenic thresholds. That's absolutely still in place. So we put that word ridgelines back in the policy there. We also see that we have made changes to height, and that will be and building length, which we'll go over in more detail. Stacy will go over those. So I'm just gonna kind of walk through the policy amendments at a high level here. These are new policies or changes to existing policies in that document, really based off feedback we've heard directly from the community, so that if a project or an idea comes forward, we can rely on these policies and say, yes, the board has blessed these policies. So those include relying and working with TRPA on scenic evaluations to really direct that private reinvestment to our town centers, hardening greenways, defensible space, rebate programs. Those are all very hot topics in the last handful of years. Being able to support high-speed broadband infrastructure capacity, childcare facilities, blight. These are things we've heard directly from the community. That conversion and reservation manual, so really to guide how we dictate and allocate development rights for land use. So we will be working on that manual in the next year. We'd also like to support different funding sources for things like infrastructure, like sidewalks, curbs, gutters, parking management plans, and community-wide snow storage. There's a big push for mixed use, as you'll see in this set of amendments. And mixed use is really, how do we combine commercial, maybe hotel, maybe restaurant, maybe office space, along with some residential components. Maybe there's a condo or an apartment upstairs. Maybe it's apartments next to commercial space. And the idea is that we have more people living near where they work. In our town centers, we're really trying to activate those ground floor uses, provide more diversity and entrepreneurship. So make it easier for mobile food trucks and vendors to start up. We have seen in the region some brick and mortar businesses that actually started from food trucks, and that's pretty cool to see. And it's an easier and more affordable way for them to get involved and get started and up and running. We'd like to make sure that we are retaining and expanding businesses in our region, that we are maximizing our town center sites for uses that the community wants to see, and that we're not just creating more paving and parking, and that we are really creative and efficient in how we dictate and utilize our parking that's out there right now. We've also seen a big push for local art in North Tahoe in a public manner. So more murals, more sculptures, things like that. Redevelopment has also been a big focus of these policy amendments. We've had a lot of vacant or underutilized and really dated spaces that we've had some interest in people trying to redevelop, and that's been a big focus here. So we're trying to create and incentivize new high quality hotels, trying to have more places for people to stay, and then shift that out of the neighborhoods, create flexible gathering spaces, make it easier for people to come in and start a new business and maybe get that building permit and create innovative space. Housing is a big push here too. We are trying to make it easier to create smart housing solutions here for all income levels, and including local worker only restrictions. We have included some restrictions, so based off community feedback directly, that we've heard the community does not want to see only second home condos be allowed in our town centers. So we're really trying to focus on how we can get that mix of housing. We'd like to be able to monitor and track and have support in tracking our housing data. One key policy that may interest people is when we're trying to create these new lodging units in our town centers, we are also proposing a policy here for the board to consider in which each one of those new lodging rooms could equal a decrease in our short-term rental cap. So for each new hotel, we could potentially have fewer short-term rentals in the neighborhoods. We've been asked to support and let the board consider sometimes utilizing our public or private lots for local worker who are living in their cars. I see and hear of people doing that on a regular basis already. And then we're trying to support being able to be creative with our housing. Can we build up on a second or third floor, especially in the town center? Can they get a couple apartments above, things like that? And now I'll hand it off to Stacy to go over the implementing regs, which are really the zoning. How do we implement those policies that I just talked about on a bigger picture scale? The zoning is how we really get to the implementation scale.
Thank you, Emily. You guys hear me okay?
And Stacy, maybe before you get started, I just wanted to recognize that we have IT on helping us behind the scenes to get the Q&A. The Q&A is active. We just, it's only visible to us at this point. So we are working on getting that visible. We don't currently have any questions to be answered. So if you have any questions at this point, go ahead and put them in there. We will be answering them actively and working with IT to get those so that everybody can see them. They will be available after this. We are recording this meeting, so we will have those available for all to see as well. So take it away, Stacy.
Thank you, Stephanie. So yeah, I'm going to dive into the actual implementing regulations. These are more or less the guiding development standards and guidelines for development. And so I'm going to start out with our town center amendments. And in response to public comment and concerns that we have heard, we are proposing to eliminate the additional building height and length allowances that we had originally presented. So those are no longer moving forward with these amendments. However, future amendments may come back, like Cindy said at the beginning of the meeting. Any future proposal for a project that may want to be considered for building extra building height or length would be considered and analyzed at that time through its project development and environmental review and such. So quickly going through the amendments to town centers, other components that we have introduced, and these are remaining the same that we have presented all along. But basically, we recognize that we need to target redevelopment in these town centers, and where can we focus on change of uses and or putting in new uses like mom and pops, really to encourage that redevelopment, but then at the same time, eliminate those barriers that these folks can't come into our town centers. And so with those, we are looking at allowed uses, areas where maybe a use wasn't allowed by right, but could be through these amendments, provided that they still meet the VMT, because traffic is still a concern that we still have. And so also looking at different types of uses. So adding food trucks and mobile vendors as an allowed use. Additionally, we also heard from the community that, and we've incorporated this into the amendments, that no new real estate and or property management offices would be allowed located on the ground floor They could be on the second floor or behind or on the side, but we don't, we want more of that active use along our town center frontages. So then similarly, in our town centers with our residential pieces, we considered looking at hotels and motels and other types of residential development with the goal to shift lodging from our residential neighborhoods back to the town centers. We've heard the concerns over the short-term rentals. And as Emily mentioned, we also have a policy that for every lodging unit constructed in the town center, the hope is to reduce the STR cap. And again, I need to stress that projects not meeting the VMT thresholds would still be required to go through a discretionary permit, which could involve environmental review and also the public process. So still, again, understanding all of the other competing factors that we have for development in our town centers. So then also we recognized a few inconsistencies between some of the standards or guidelines or other codes that the county has, including streetscape and roadway design characteristics. We also added some, guidelines and standards for frontage improvements, and also updated the TBAP or the Tahoe Basin Area Plan to reference the county's code of the Lake Tahoe Shore Zone. So really, the idea behind this is to ensure consistency throughout our documents, but also to inform the reader what is required of them for any type of development that they may want to come and consider within our town centers, and actually throughout the whole TBAP of which it governs. So we did refine the building length where we acknowledged and recognized that there was no building length maximums in Tahoe City. So we added those. And then we also did some clarification of where there was some inconsistency between the two town centers, and then required compatibility between the residential zone districts, something else we heard from the public. So we, again, this is not changed and it's not new, but just reiterating, we are proposing a maximum 75 feet on all parcel frontages that directly face residential zone districts, and decrease the building length from 350 feet to 200 feet in our mixed use tourist zone district. So as we mentioned at the beginning of this town hall, is that we are keeping the existing building height maximum at 56 feet. We are not considering any change to that. The only change to this is we're eliminating the reference to stories. It currently reads as 4 stories or 56 feet. We feel the 56 feet measured in feet is really definitive, and stories allows for, a known height maximum. And then there's also special plan areas where this is really kind of a technical cleanup, where we acknowledge that we had no height allowances for these transition areas and areas outside of core areas. And then similarly, we also introduced a rear setback modification to all town center mixed use districts, where we removed the 10-foot rear setback when adjacent to a residential subdistrict. This was facilitated again by public comment, and really it was acknowledged that these town center parcels, some of them are rather small, and with a rather large 10-foot rear setback, it can cause a constraint for development. And then we acknowledge that the residential subdistricts have a rear yard setback that would provide for that buffer, which we were hoping for between the residential and town centers. But this, we're hoping, will eliminate some of those barriers that redevelopment is considering or experiencing in our town centers. So then moving on to design standards and guidelines, we also included groundwater interception. This is to align with TRPA. We acknowledge that we did not have any allowances for below grade parking. And so to become consistent with TRPA, we've added groundwater allowances, provided that they meet all of the standards and requirements of TRPA. So we basically reference TRPA's Code of Ordinances section so that we're aligned with them. Similarly, with snow storage, we acknowledge that we needed to basically outline where snow storage is required and what projects are required to provide snow storage. So moving on to housing related amendments, in the residential zone districts, we looked at, how can we facilitate additional housing, needed housing? How can we align with the state's trends that they are moving towards? And so we looked at a number of our residential zone districts and we looked at all of our residential zone districts and also the development standards with those. And so we included some amendments that hopefully will eliminate the need for variances, say for corner lots. So that's why we're adding a street side setback allowance. And also, again, referring to the shore zone requirements. And then we also looked at the following residential zone districts, and these all have a policy which are designated for preferred, affordable, moderate, and achievable housing areas. And so of these residential districts, we looked at allowing any kind of residential to be an allowed use as opposed to a use permit or other, if 100% of the units are deed restricted. And then similarly, we also looked at the development standards that were possibly causing constraints to the development of these smaller housing lots or, things like that. So with the hopes to really facilitate and encourage housing to be built in all shapes and sizes. So then we did look at our other zone districts, and within our community service zone districts, similarly throughout the document, we looked at housing and where is housing allowed, where is it not, where should it be allowed. And so we incorporated all these throughout the document. So, again, allowing residential, allowing mobile vendors, identifying employee housing. And so really to just have the encouragement through all of our zone districts to encourage that mixed use, encourage redevelopment. And so similarly in our recreation and tourist zone district, we looked at, again, allowing housing where it wasn't otherwise considered. Again, residential uses and in both the 64-acre tract and the Grand Bakken subdistrict. And then in our West Shore, we acknowledged that there was no allowances for mobile vendors. So again, to carry that through, we're proposing those to be allowed in these 3 West Shore mixed use subdistricts. So then area-wise standards and guideline amendments were also considered, parking being one. And again, this was just really to memorialize what Emily had mentioned earlier about our pilot program that we had. So this is really just to incorporate it into, it's already in place. And so it's really, again, just to assist the reader in knowing what is required of them when developing in our Tahoe Basin Area Plan. And then we added movable tiny houses as an allowed use to align with Placer County and South Lake Tahoe. And then we are referring to the sign ordinance of TRPA rather than, keeping our own, which was pretty outdated. And then a various number of miscellaneous cleanups and typos, which always come with amendments. So, and as Crystal mentioned, we did proceed with environmental review, again, as requested by the public. And an addendum was prepared to the 2017 EIR that was prepared for the original Tahoe Basin Area Plan. This will be posted online with the Planning Commission materials on Thursday night. And then we are furthering the initial environmental checklist, so the IEC and findings that is being prepared for TRPA, and those will be presented when we proceed with our public hearings with TRPA. And so the addendum that I just spoke of, which is an addendum to the EIR for the Tahoe Basin Area Plan and Tahoe City Lodge project that was conducted approved in 2017. It was prepared in compliance with CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and it concluded that none of these changes resulted in the preparation of a subsequent EIR, and nor did any of these amendments result in any new or severe significant effects that weren't already identified in the original area plan EIR. So next steps, where do we go from here? As I hope most of you know, we are going to be presenting to the Planning Commission on August 10th. It is to be held at the North Lake Tahoe Event Center in Kings Beach. We are requesting a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors with a targeted date to present to them on October 17th. And then thereafter, we head into all of the required public hearings with TRPA. So APC, RPIC, and Governing Board. And so that concludes our presentation, but I'll turn it over to Crystal for some final notes.
Yeah, thank you, Emily and Stacy, for the presentation. And that, as Stacy just mentioned, that concludes our slides. I did want to point out again that we are going before the Planning Commission on the 10th. And so as you heard here tonight, we did take out some of the amendments. So we eliminated the amendments to height and length. We had a lot of comments on those at our March March workshop that we held. And so those have been eliminated for now, but as Supervisor Gustafson mentioned at the top of the meeting, we may explore in the future some amendments that address height. And so we separated those out from this package, but we may spend some time studying those in the future to take a more targeted approach to see where it may make sense to come in with some amendments to certain areas in our town centers where we want to see some increased height. I know TRPA has had a lot of conversation about increased height. I've seen some comments and questions in the chat about that. I want to make sure that you understand that this process here, this amendment package, is being initiated by the county, not TRPA. While we have worked with them on it to make sure it conforms with the regional plan, it is a county initiated program. And so at this juncture, we are not proposing increases in height beyond the 56 feet, which is allowed today under the code. But I do want to acknowledge that there's been conversations with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency about whether or not there are some areas throughout the basin where increased height might be appropriate. So I will acknowledge those conversations are happening, but that is a separate conversation with the TRPA, and they may come forward with a work program looking at that. But as for this amendment package, we're not proposing anything beyond what is allowed today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. We're still answering questions in the Q&A chat function, but I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions. And I'm looking to see, you'll need to raise your hand, and I don't see any hands raised at this point, but okay, it looks like, there's a bunch. And I can't tell who raised their hand first. So I'm going to go with the person at the top, which is Brad Altman.
Go ahead, Brad.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I really like what I'm hearing regarding, the aging and dilapidated structures in the commercial corridors. And that is something that, Emily spent some time addressing and such. And I'm not sure if Cindy is still on the call, but the question is, how do we actually encourage these property owners who sometimes have owned these properties for decades and decades and decades to actually move forward and either redevelop them, sell them, do anything? Like, how does that get encouraged? I know that the county, for instance, invested money into trying to alleviate some of the problems that Samir was having with his development by buying the adjacent building. And Samir doesn't even have a foundation in the ground, or I don't know if that's ever gonna get built, but at least he tore down that building. So that's something. So how can we encourage these people, or, there's people that own significant amounts of these properties that are all derelict. It's the same person or people or group. And what sort of leverage does the county have there?
Thank you, Brad, for your question. So the study that I referenced at the very top of the meeting tonight was a study that was conducted or commissioned by our county executive office, and it looked at the why behind the lack of reinvestment and redevelopment in our town centers, and it had a set of recommended actions. One of them was to look at our, regulatory framework, and that's the reason we're here tonight. There were some other actions that were related to looking at incentive programs, and I know our executive office has actually brought forward some changes to a program that they developed a few years back, incentivizing tourist accommodation units. And so I don't know I think Stephanie is still on. I don't know if we're looking at any further changes to that, but I know that we have made changes and we have had property owners interested in that program and are coming forward with, boutique hotels or hotel redevelopment projects and intend to utilize that program. So Stephanie, I might turn to you to see if there's other areas with that program that you're looking to modify, or other programs in general that you're looking at bringing on.
Yeah, no, we're not looking to currently modify, but like Crystal said, there is a, incentive program with our, tourist accommodation units. So, but I think to answer your question, Brad, government has a limited toolbox to affect what happens on private land and sort of the investments that happen on private land. What we're trying to do here is streamline to provide, the tools that we have in our toolbox to help affect that in a positive direction. So, and that means, both bringing, good projects in the door, but also, good projects that provide us the environmental benefit and sort of redevelopment benefits that come with that. So, like I said, our tools are limited. We're doing all that we can to try to promote that within our sphere of influence.
And we have added policies specifically to the policy section of the plan that would really support potential future programs and projects coming forward, to really kind of support that redevelopment and try to convert and disincentivize blight and empty, dilapidated structures. So that, could pave the way for potential future programs as well.
Great, thank you, Stephanie and Emily. Okay, next on the list here is Ann Nichols.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thank you. You do have a significant part in all this. You were for Martis Valley West, 760 homes on the ridge. We have 14 or 13 projects on the books right now. So you have a significant part to play in this. You can't throw this on TRPA or throw it on the state. You are making these decisions, and until we have a cumulative impact on all these projects, until you can guarantee us, we're already in gridlock now at peak periods, until you can guarantee us that this isn't going to be more, which you can't right now, until you can guarantee us we have a street by street evacuation plan, this has just got to be completely set aside. This is not going to, until you have a cap on income for achievable housing. Right now, if you work 30 hours a week in the basin and have a business license, you could be a multimillionaire and qualify. So the developers are going to build expensive units. This is really poorly thought out. I'm very disappointed in the county. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ann. Next in line here is Leah Kaufman.
Hi, thank you. I agree that, of course, we need sustainable redevelopment, but my concern is that the piecemeal approach under CEQA law, if you bifurcate out the height, density, reduced parking and setbacks, and it's deferred to TRPA, there won't be a cumulative impact analysis, kind of what Ann said. And I think all of us need to work together. It's too broad-based. When you have you can do this in every single plan area that allows multifamily. So you make multifamily and multi-person and you increase density to 62. I just had a project today that we figured out the density, and in a 3,000 square foot building, they could put 32 people based on the fact that they have a half an acre. So my concern with that is that we need to have like established policies, not just such broad sweeps of our pen saying every single place where it says multiple family can have multi-person employee housing and that kind of thing without thinking about what will the impacts be. Palisades today said that about 50% of their employees that are not the J1s have cars. So and that's important. You have to take a look at how many cars are really needed and where those cars impacts are in the neighborhoods, et cetera. I usually write my statements out. So you have heard from me about a lot of things, but one of my biggest beefs is you have a statement to preserve character in established neighborhoods. However, there are no policies in place with TRPA or the county to preserve community character, which is a huge issue. And that has what has allowed the 14,000 square foot McMansions, and that is what has allowed the luxury condominiums. But community character is important and it's a sum of many parts. And I would really like to see some planning policies put in place that are meaningful in regards to preserving the character. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Good comments. And I do want to point out that we are, we'll be forwarding your comments. We're taking notes and we'll definitely summarize this before the Planning Commission and definitely encourage comments. So we are here to answer questions. I did on the density side, as I mentioned before, we're not proposing to increase any standards. So some people might not understand what the density standards is. So I just want to maybe clarify that. So density standards are the number of units per acre of land. So we're really bound by TRPA on that and not proposing any changes there. But I do appreciate your comments, Leah and Ann, and we will make sure that we summarize those before the commission next week. So moving on, the next person on the list is Megan. Megan, if you have a question.
Yeah, good evening. Number one is I want to thank you is the 5 recommendations that were made by NETRAC at the November 30th meeting last year. As you went through those this evening, to which I thank you, but it hasn't been included in prior presentations. And what I would recommend is that these 5 recommendations from NETRAC is be presented at the next meeting on October 10th, because to date, the NETRAC members haven't received that. And we do appreciate that you did listen to NETRAC and we got some good feedback. My second comment is on the staff report that will be released on Thursday. Will the correspondence letters from members of the community be included, as well as the comments from the March 23rd, 2023 TBAP workshop? It's a lot of the original area plan team members had attended that workshop, and just saw recently that it was posted on Placer County's website. But will that be also included in the staff report? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Good questions. I'll speak to the NITRAC recommendation that will be included in the staff report. It's also in the presentation for next week. We didn't put it into these slides here today, but I decided to speak to it. So sorry, I had a slide. I could have inserted it. Actually, I think we have it in the back of the deck. We could pull it up here, but We did include it, so you will see that come out. As far as the attachments that'll be included in the staff report package, we do provide the correspondence to the commission. Stacy Wydra is in our planning department in Tahoe, and she's pulled the package together. So I don't want to misspeak here, Stacy. So I'm going to turn to you to answer the questions about the specific attachments.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. So the summary, so it's just a spreadsheet of comments that was from the March public workshop that we have is on our website. But we can certainly attach it as one of the attachments to that staff report that will go out Thursday night.
Great, thank you, Stacy, and good comments, Megan. I appreciate you participating tonight. Okay, so next on the list is Ellie.
Hi, Ellie Waller. Thank you. I do have some concerns of how some of the red lines are written. And I just want to bring up the scenic standards that limit the ability to achieve the permissible, I understand the word permissible, height, density, coverage, and visual massing. It will be good to know so the Planning Commission as well and the public understands what is Placer County staff beliefs of what is limiting the redevelopment as far as scenic standards. It says support reevaluation of TRPA's scenic standards. Also, with that said, have all the planning commissioners toured Placer County, Tahoe, so they can understand that Kings Beach Town Center and Tahoe City have diverse differences. Tahoma Village Center is very different than Tahoe Vista Village Center. And I think it would be appropriate for them to be toured, walking tours. The weather's great. And then, of course, Cindy stated this is not one and done. And when you go through the entire packet and you get to statistics that need to be updated, how are you basing your numbers for affordable housing if in the table 3.1 population trends in the area plan are the 2010 census, and almost all the other housing units, seasonal housing units, are 2010. The median income is sourced 2013 American Survey. Where was the 2015 stuff? I mean, this is just, the Placer County TAU supply, the Placer County CFA supply is sourced from TRPA in Placer County in 2015 with all the conversions. I think we need up-to-date data. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ellie. I'm gonna turn, I don't know, Emily or Stacy, if you have want to respond to any of those specific questions about the amendment pieces themselves.
Yeah, I caught a couple of those. So for the scenic standards, Ellie, we have been talking with TRPA about their scenic thresholds. It has been proven difficult for some redevelopment projects to actually redevelop in the town centers where TRPA and the jurisdictions are trying to push that development, say a hotel or mixed use project, for example. Whereas, you know, a new home, large home could be built outside of a town center right on the lake. So we're trying to just get a better understanding and continue that conversation with TRPA to try to really be able to accomplish the development we'd like in those town centers so that it doesn't keep sprawling out outside of the town centers and affecting scenic standards. I hear you on the data points as well. This set of amendments has been in the works for several years now. So recent census data only came out in the last year. We have absolutely been relying on that. Also, the Mountain Housing Council's Regional Housing Implementation Plan is providing updated housing needs. So some of the data that is currently in the area plan or was originally talked about has been replaced, and staff are very aware of that, and we'll make sure that our decision makers know there is new data out there. Did I miss any? Was there something else, anyone?
I think that was it. Thank you, Emily. Okay, so
So
I got,
I just wanted to recognize there's one other comment from Ellie in the chat. I can read it if that, or in the Q&A, I can read it if that's helpful.
sure. Yeah.
Yes, potential exemptions through design review needs to be discussed at the planning commission. May provide for lesser environmental reviews. So I'm not sure if there's a question there, but just wanted to recognize your comment here, Ellie.
Yeah, that's good. I will say that, you know, commercial projects, mixed use projects, multifamily projects all go through design review, which is they go before a committee. It's a citizen advisory committee in Tahoe, and where we look at projects and look at the design and whether or not it's in conformance with design standards, both placer design standards and TRPA. So it's a pretty extensive process that we go through with design review to make sure that projects, you know, let's just say a project comes forward and it doesn't have to have a use permit. It does have to have design review. And so we are checking those projects to make sure that they conform to the standards. Okay, so thank you for that, Stephanie. So I'm looking at, we've got a few more hands up. The next on the list is Rob Olson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, I mean, this is definitely complicated stuff that everyone's talking about. And so I would applaud both sides, the community engagement and Placer County for pushing on this. And at the end of the day, I think everybody wants the same thing, which is more housing for locals and pushing short-term rentals into town centers. I think that what you guys have been working on does check a lot of those boxes. And I do applaud that you're trying to push it forward and listen to the community. And ultimately, like to Brad Altman's point of there are developers sitting on property and why aren't they developing it? And as someone that's been looking at this, the numbers have to make sense. And I think that some of what you guys are doing is helpful for the numbers. But there may be other kind of, and it seems like TRPA may be changing some stuff with density. I don't want to muddy the waters, but if you had a property owner that didn't want to do much with their property, but maybe the next door neighbor wanted to do something, it seems like having the ability to take those development rights adjacent to it or trade those so that we're not increasing the density holistic numbers, but we're shifting those around much like a city does with air rights and stuff. That also might be the way where a stagnant property, or maybe the property owner is sitting on it, but they don't have the capacity to do anything to it or the wherewithal to do anything with it, but they maybe be able to get some money for selling those as a commodity, much like a housing unit or coverage or transferring stuff. That, you know, I'm not saying to do it in this current, you know, adjustment, but it seems like looking at different ways. And then with the height issue, how can you say, well, maybe 50% or 25% of the property is at this height, but the rest of it's down low? That also might start to look at it a little bit more complex, where it's not all 100% at the new max height. You've got some adjustment in height and some variety. So I would, you know, tell the county to keep pushing on it. And the last thing I would say is I know that you're looking at, you know, certain areas that aren't zoned for any housing. It seems to me, and I'm all for like food trucks and stuff moving into the area. I think it's a good business model, makes sense. But those people are coming from outside the area, and you're allowing that to happen, which I'm all for. But you're not allowing in some industrial areas to have employee housing there, where the people would be not coming out of the basin into the basin to work. So you're allowing a food truck to maybe come from Reno or some outlying area into the basin, but not allowing a housing unit to be built. That really needs to be looked at. Like, we should have the ability to build employee housing that's designated for people that are working in the area, that they could walk to work pretty much. That also needs to explore. So I would keep pushing on it. And my last question would be, is this an all or nothing? Would this go to vote and have amendments to it, or is it an all or nothing kind of vote when it comes down to it?
Really, really good comments, Rob. I appreciate your feedback there. And so to answer your last question first, it is not an all or nothing. We are proposing, it's a repeal and replace of the area plan. And the reason for that is there's some track changes scattered throughout. And so it's a little cleaner to do it that way. The commission or the board could choose to take some of these amendments and throw out some others. They could direct us to make those changes. So we will take the direction from the commission next week and see where they go with it. If they make some changes, we would have to obviously make those changes to the document and bring that before the board. But it's not an all or nothing. And then I think, staff, we're committed to this, kind of adaptive management approach. I don't think this is going to be the last amendment package that we look at. We are, continue to track the, redevelopment that is or is not happening in our town centers to see whether or not we need to make some adjustments. So while this may go forward, we may come back in with some additional changes. I did want to point out on one of your comments, which was really great, about sort of assembling, sites that, to get increased density. Let's just say you have a neighbor that has density. There is actually a provision right now in our current document that allows you to do that in town centers only. So it's a good point. I don't know if it's something that could be explored in the future where we could do it outside of town centers, but currently you can take let's just say density from your neighbor's property and assemble a larger site, do development on your property, but take that density, those development rights from the neighboring property to get a project done on your site. So that actually is allowed today under the code, but only in town centers. So I just wanted to point that out. But really good comments overall, and we will be sure to summarize those for the commission. Also encourage you to join the commission meeting next week. So I've got another a few more folks here. I think I am going to say this right. Niobe looks like is next.
Hi, yes, it's Niobe. How are you? I just came on. I just got back from my job at the hospital. I've been talking a lot with employees of the hospital because affordable housing obviously is a very big issue, and the density that's being proposed is not really addressing affordable housing, but achievable housing, from what I understand. And it's really not addressing any of their needs. A lot of the people from the hospital actually commute from Sparks and Reno because they can't afford anything up here. And then others live in 2-bedroom apartments with a full family of 3 generations. And in Klein and in Kings Beach, it's really sad. It's really sad. And these are people that support the hospitals and the infrastructure of this community. Restaurants, all those people, they rent. They do not purchase, first of all. They rent. And I'm not sure where this is going as far as if it's addressing. I know that the county is under pressure to make workforce housing, but is it really being addressed? I guess I need some information there. And these amendments are kind of scary from the point of view that TRPA has not met thresholds since 2019. I've asked multiple times about the 10 thresholds and when those are going to be updated, and none of that has been. And so one of those is scenic resources. Another one, of course, is air quality, water quality. All this obviously affects density. Density affects all this. We want walkable communities and public transport and so forth to work between those communities, and I understand that. But the achievable housing that is being proposed does not address the affordable question, nor the people that really support this infrastructure of the community that could walk to work. The housing for these places should be right there, and that should be rental property. Maybe we consider projects, and maybe there's different developers for this. There are developers out there that do this. They specifically do affordable housing, and maybe put a STR component in there. Have a number of units that are STR permitted, transfer those TIUs out of the neighborhoods, make the neighborhoods happier, and have a STR component and an affordable housing component in the same complex multi-unit. Just a thought.
Thank you, Naomi.
Okay.
I appreciate your comments. I am gonna, so again, I do want to point out, we are not proposing any increases to density standards. So we're kind of set with what TRPA allows us to do there. But I'm gonna point to Emily because, you know, she does a lot of work on housing in the Tahoe area and has framed up a lot of amendments here that are aimed at helping to encourage the construction of housing. And I wanted to just speak to the achievable definition, because I think that there's some confusion in the community about what that means. So Emily, can you just touch on that really quick?
Sure. So TRPA has a few different categories of housing, potential deed restricted housing. There is affordable, which is really the lower income. There is moderate, which is more of that middle income. And then there is achievable, which is up to 120% of area median income, or at least one member of the household works locally within our jurisdiction. There are natural market effects there where, you know, a developer could build it and deed restrict it to achievable. They're not going to be able to charge an outrageous rental price and find people to rent those units. So we are really working with some market dynamics. Those have been effective in other programs, not only in our area, but throughout a lot of other mountain town and resort communities. And really the focus on this specific set of amendments was to try and create an option for anybody who is interested in building multiple or apartments or affordable kind of achievable housing to kind of be more streamlined. Going through a complex permitting process and going through extensive environmental review when we already know they can check off some of those boxes because we've already established thresholds, really adds a lot of years and potentially millions of dollars to a project cost, which then makes these projects not pencil and they don't get built. So by allowing some of these areas, these zone districts to have developers come in and build affordable or moderate or achievable housing by right, like it is allowed by right, it streamlines the process, it decreases the costs. We're really trying to create an incentive here. It's not the answer to every housing problem. We definitely are trying to build a toolbox with a lot of different solutions. We're the county purchased land north of Tahoe City to try and build housing there called the Delaware Creek Crossing Project that would be affordable and local worker. We have a number of programs in place to utilize the existing housing stock. We're trying to streamline some development of some of that housing through this set of amendments. And then we're working with TRPA on some other potential amendments to housing that would make it even easier to build workforce housing across the basin. And then we have a long list of other sites that, like Rob mentioned, are currently not allowed per the zoning to build housing, and those may be incorporated into a future amendment as well. And all of this, I'll conclude that comment, is really bound by the carrying capacity and development right thresholds that TRPA gives us. So we have a certain amount of residential units that we can allocate and distribute. And we're working on a development rights manual to really align how we allocate and distribute those development rights per the regional priorities. That'll be a work program that gets established in the next year.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, I'm going to move to Adam Wilson with the NTCA. Who's on? Adam? Adam, I think, I'm not sure if you're on, but you might
Yes,
be
I
muted.
am. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I thought you guys were controlling the mute, so I didn't even look at my mute button. Yes, thank you. A couple comments. First of all, thank you for the presentation, and also thank you for the continued outreach. I think it's so important as we continue to go through this process that we have things like this, as well as the other, all that whole list of outreach that you guys have done so far and still ahead of us. It's great to get the comments and the engagement of the community as we move these processes forward. I just have a couple of comments. First, I think if, being a longtime resident, I grew up here back in the 80s, left after high school, came back in 2000, and my family had been up here for a long time, lived in the Tahoe Vista, Kings Beach area. So very familiar with what has happened or the lack thereof over all this time. And so I do think just walking through the town centers that you have indicated here, it is really sad, quite frankly, to see what Kings Beach has become. And I think there was a couple of comments earlier about how do we incentivize ownership of these buildings or the developers to get this done. And I think this is one way to do that. We're trying to find ways in which we can incentivize developers to come and actually develop these areas and buy these properties, maybe from, as noted before, families that have had these for generations, and the current generation just has no desire to spend the money. They're just waiting to basically cash out and move on. And so if we don't create incentives and we don't work together collaboratively, and it's never going to be perfect for everybody, but it's so important to the economic health of our region. And again, just walk through Kings Beach. I know there's residents from Kings Beach that are on this call. If you've been there for a long time, it used to be different. It used to be very exciting. There's a lot of business going on there. Like I said, my family owned businesses in the Kings Beach and Tahoe Vista area. We were part of the North Tahoe Business Association as a kid. Like, just the vibrancy that used to basically happen and lived in Kings Beach in that area it's just sad to see what's going on now. So I do really appreciate this effort. I know it's not perfect, but if we don't do something and we don't allow and incentivize developers in some way so they can pencil, I think Rob and a couple other people talked about it has to pencil. I mean, someone's not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart. That just is not happening, or we'd see a lot of development going on in those areas. So just thanks again for that. We got to create this vibrancy in our town centers. It's incredibly critical for economic health. And I really appreciate the work that's going on here. I appreciate the community engagement. And I hope that this gets moved along. And I hope that future amendments continue this kind of engagement and can continue to drive redevelopment in these town centers and workforce housing and all of the things that you've pointed out and have been pointed out by others this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam, for your comments. So I've got two folks on who have already spoken and one person that hasn't. So it looks we're at about 6:55 and we're going to close tonight at 7. So I'm going to turn to Judith Tornese first so we can get her comments, and then Leah and Rob, I'll come to you after that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I agree with several of the other comments that were made about cumulative impacts, affordable housing, plus the need for adequate parking. We can't just decrease the parking that's required. I have several additional questions. One of them is, you mentioned 56-foot height limit. Does that also apply to lakeside properties? Because it seems to me that lakefront height should be lower to keep the scenic views for the public. The lake views are really important to maintain, and I think they should be treasured. Also, I wanted to mention, you mentioned you were plan to shift the lodging to town centers. How do you plan to eliminate the short-term rental at town centers? I mean, we're taking lodging to correct this neglect of local housing. So I'd like to have you respond to that question on how to control the short-term rentals. And lastly, could you clarify further, how does the Placer TBAP interact with the TRPA amendments? Are they the same or consistent, or you did discuss it, but if you could clarify it further, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you for the comments.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Judy. So the first, I'm going to answer your last question first. So the question about how this relates to what TRPA is doing, this is a separate work program. So county initiated, it's not initiated by TRPA, what we're talking about here tonight. However, anything that we do has to be consistent with their adopted plans. And so it has to, we're not making changes to their regional plan. We're not making changes to their threshold standards. Projects that come in still have to meet, threshold standards. And so we do know that they've been talking about some some potential height increases and where those might be appropriate in the centers around the basin. I don't know that they've initiated a work program around that. In other words, I don't know that they've initiated any specific amendments, but there's been conversation around that. So how this relates to that is simply that this is a standalone Placer County initiated work program that's been in the works for a couple of years now, before TRPA started talking about height increases. So this is not a TRPA initiated program. They are having their own conversations, but in terms of how this relates, we must conform to the TRPA regional plan and threshold standards. So to answer your question about height, 56 feet is allowed in town centers, and that is consistent with the regional plan. And however, I want to say, and that includes properties on the lakeside. I do want to clarify, though, that anything that a project or redevelopment project that comes forward on the lake, they still have to meet scenic threshold standards. They have to do a pretty extensive scenic analysis. And so while 56 feet may be allowed, some projects might not be able to achieve that on the lakeside because they still have to demonstrate that they're not impacting any scenic thresholds. And so while 56 feet may be allowed, per the code, right? If you look at what's allowed on your property on the lakeside, it doesn't necessarily mean that a property lakeside would be able to achieve that. It really just depends on the property. And then for your question about STRs and what we're doing there, and STRs are short-term rentals, we do have a program that's managed out of our Tahoe office. Our board came in last year, I think it was February 2022, with major changes to the short-term rental ordinance, and they capped short-term rentals. It's at 3,900. We currently have issued about 3,200 to 3,300 permits. It's been stable at that number for about 8 or 9 months. We are we have a stakeholder group that we work with to adaptively manage that program. There have been discussions about whether or not the cap is at the right spot. And so those are questions that we, might bring forward to our board at a later date of whether or not, is the cap set at the right spot? Do they want to make any further amendments to that code? And so we do, our team, Emily Setzer here actually is a program manager for the short-term rental program, and we actively manage that program and look for areas where we might want to make some further adjustments. As far as how this program relates to the short-term, there's a policy included that encourages short-term a reduction of the short-term rental cap when lodging units come forward in the town center. So the goal here is to really bring lodging into our town centers, which is where we want to see it. It is where intensification is directed through the regional plan, where you want to see lodging units, housing units, retail, commercial, and you want to activate that town center. And so that is really the goal. We'd like to see some lodging in our town centers. We know we need it. And so there's a policy that we've added to where the board would consider, as lodging units come forward, the board can consider perhaps a reduction in the short-term rental cap. So we've tied these together to make sure that there's a policy in the area plan that addresses short-term rentals in terms of trying to get those lodging units into the town center and outside of the residential areas. So that's, hopefully I answered that question. Emily, I don't know if I missed anything, if you want to chime in.
No, I think you answered that accurately. It is a policy that we included because we have heard the community's concerns about the lack of housing and the number of short-term rentals and the lack of hotels available for people to stay. I also always encourage anyone who wants to talk about their concerns about short-term rentals is welcome to contact me. I am ultimately not the decision maker, so really try to encourage people to reach out to our Board of Supervisors, and you're elected to voice your concerns because our board ultimately decides on the amount of short-term rentals allowed in the area.
Thank you, Emily. So we've got a few more questions. We are over the time here. I think we've got one person who has their hand up who I haven't responded to. So I'm going to go ahead and recognize that person. And then for the others that have their hands up and you've already asked a question, what I would ask you to do is to email either Emily or Stacy. You'll see their emails here on the screen and they can get back to you with answers. But I see somebody, ENR Straver, I think it is. I'm going to go ahead and take your question and that will be the last one.
Oh, did I have my hand up? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. And yes, you had your hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out how to use this. I'm just clicking on stuff. But
that's okay. That's okay.
I know I listened to your whole presentation. I thought you did a very good job. I do have an awful lot of concerns, and I do let my concerns be known on the message boards. And in fact, I have so many, I really don't want to take up any more of your time, and I will get back on those message boards to let you know what they are. But I do have to say, I do have to address something that this gentleman before me said, and that was about the past of Kings Beach. I've been in Kings Beach an awful long time. I've been on the North Shore for 43 years. There was a time no one came to Kings Beach because no one would be caught dead in this town. And when I moved here, I actually had to get the county to plow the roads back here because they wouldn't even do that. So we have come an awful long way in a positive manner to make this place a good place to live. And we worked with past staff, we worked with past representatives from the Board of Supervisors, we worked with past TRPA, and I think we've done a wonderful job in getting to where we have got. Now, yes, we have boarded up buildings, but you have to remember that we also had a very bad economic time with COVID. It was a time where people didn't want to spend the money, and now we're just coming out of that, and you have people sitting on property they don't want to develop. I don't believe it's because we had these amendments, I mean, not amendments, but because we had this area plan. I worked very hard on that area plan, and it dismays me that it's being dismantled bit by bit. Now, some of the dismantling actually is very good. I approve of some of it, but we have to be very careful as we go forward to not open the door for development that's going to destroy our environment. And I noticed all the organizations that Emily said she addressed, and I thought, well, where are the environmental organizations? And I didn't see any. So I want to just let you know that I'm going to stop talking so you all can go home. But those were my concerns. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. And again, so that's going to be the last comment here or question that we'll answer. But I really do encourage any other folks that have questions or comments, please send them to either Emily or Stacy. You'll see them here on the screen, their email addresses. And then we'll also summarize and provide a summary to the Planning Commission orally at their meeting next week. So real quick, the Planning Commission hearing, they are going to be in Tahoe next Thursday, August 10th at 11 o'clock. They will be at the North Tahoe Event Center in Kings Beach. So I encourage all of you to come and listen in and provide comments before our commission. We really appreciate your participation tonight and your feedback, and really thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. So with that, I'm gonna close.
Crystal, let me just close out by Stephanie Holloway, your deputy CEO, by saying thank you again to you, Emily, Stacy. I know Kristen's working behind the scenes on our IT and taking notes, but thank you to all of you, and thank you to everybody that joined us. The Placer County Sheriff said to me last week, or said to the board, that, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go farther, go together. And we really consider everybody on this call part of our team. We appreciate your feedback. We're happy to engage with you even outside of these more formal settings. So you have our contact information. Call us. We're happy to sit down with you. Thanks, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.